Roper here, and welcome to the Smart Buildings Academy podcast. This is episode number 486. Today's title will be Empowering Users, Effective Training for Building Automation Systems. Now, within this podcast episode, we're going to cover a lot of great material. We're going to start off with understanding the learning retention rates and also the different learning styles of your students. And then we're going to get into the importance of training and building automation and some of the benefits you might see out of a proper training program. And then we'll cover the differences in training approaches between customers and then also internal teams at your local office. Next, we'll get into some practical tips to make sure your training sessions are impactful, meaningful, and also successful. And then last, we'll go over some common challenges for delivering training and instruction and some strategic solutions to prevent those common challenges. And as always, if you want to watch this podcast again, it's going to be on our website. You can go to podcast.smartbuildingsacademy.com/486. Okay, so with that intro being said, we can go ahead and jump into our first topic. And this will be, we're going to cover learning retention rates. So learning retention rates are basically remembering what we learn and how we can apply what we learn. So this pyramid, I've used this pyramid ever since I first started entering the education field for the past 7 years. I got a laminated copy right here that was given to me by my mentor when I first started teaching, and I still use it to this day when I structure my lesson plans and think about the content that I want to put in them. So this pyramid, as you can see, is designed by the percentage of how much the student's going to remember based on the category here. At the top of the pyramid, as you can see, it's very little, then it increases as we go down the pyramid here. So we're going to start off with the very top piece of the pyramid, and this is going to be lecture. So as we can see, lecture, they're only really going to remember 5% of a lecture. So this could be where someone is up in a classroom setting or maybe a job site, and they're just talking to the student, okay? The student's not participating, not talking, and the deliverer or the teacher is not asking any engagement questions. The student is just listening to the teacher teach, okay? So that's only 5% learning retention. So keep that in mind whenever you're delivering instruction, if you're ever going to do that. Next, we have reading. Now, reading's a critical skill. However, this is like reading a manual, an IOM manual or a data sheet or something like that. They're only going to retain 10% of that. So you need to fulfill that with another type of activity if it's only reading for them to make sure they retain that. But again, I still think reading is a critical skill, especially in our industry. Next, we have audio visual. This can be like a pre-recorded video instruction or some kind of lesson that was recorded. This could be on YouTube, it could be on TikTok or Twitter X or whatever type of social media platform is out there. Or it could be a professional organization like Smart Buildings Academy where we make these pre-recorded video lessons. Okay, 20% learning retainage on that. Next, we have the demonstration. Now, demonstration includes you demonstrating something to the student. Okay, for example, I do this a lot in my live classes where I'll demonstrate how to measure current on a powered device. I'll get my multimeter out and I'll just show them exactly how to do that, the steps on how to do that. That's demonstrating to the student, okay? So they're gonna get a little bit more out of that because they're seeing someone do something. So that's 30% retainage on that. Now you could do this on the job site too. If you have a panel on a job site and you wanna show them how to upload a program, that is a demonstration. Next, we have a discussion group. This is good. You could do this in small groups or you can do it like on a one-to-one group between you and the technician student if you want to. We do this a lot in our WFD classes here at Smart Buildings Academy. During our lecture, I like to tie in discussion groups because lecture gets very boring sometimes, and I break it up by asking a lot of questions and getting them to discuss things. So discussion groups, that's 50% learning, because they're actually engaging in the conversation and thinking of answers as they're going through it. Okay, so that's a discussion group. Next, we have practice by doing. This would be an example of the student actually doing something, not the teacher. Okay, The demonstration was more like the teacher demonstrating something. And when we get down over here to the 75% retainage, this is the student actually hooking up a sensor, okay, practicing doing that, or maybe writing a program or something like that independently by themselves. This is practice by doing. They're going to get 75% retainage out of that. The last one we see on the pyramid is teaching others. This is 90%. So in order to teach others, you got to be kind of like, you got to understand what you're teaching. So they're going to have to research everything, and then they teach others how to do it. I do this a lot in my workforce development classes. I have the student teach the mentor or their manager about a sequence of operation, for example. They'll teach them how a constant volume air handler works. They'll be teaching the mentor how to do that. This is really good too, because it also teaches the student how to communicate with customers, with subcontractors, and whoever else they might be dealing with on the job site. Okay, so this is a pretty good rule of thumb on retention rates. Some people might benefit more than others in these different categories, but overall, based on a lot of studies, this is pretty accurate, and I put it into practice every year that I've been teaching. So I think this is a great pyramid and a good way to guide your learning activities. Next, we have different learning styles we need to be aware of when we're teaching. The first type of learning style is we have some learners that might be more visual. They like visual representations. So this is the type of learning where they're going to want to prefer diagrams like flow charts. It could be a Venn diagram or any kind of pictures, things like that. Videos, they want to see videos, see things being done, or any kind of visual aids. Like if you have a sensor or something like that, you can show them what this looks like. And those are more for visual learners. Next, we have the auditory learners, and obviously that's through hearing. Okay, so they learn best through participating in discussions. They might like to hear podcasts, just the audio only, or maybe even they're very good at verbal instructions. Okay, listening to verbal instructions. Next, we have kinesthetic learners, and this is where they prefer hands-on experiences. This is probably one of my main types of learners that I'm seeing as technicians, because a lot of technicians love hands-on stuff. So anytime you can get them some hands-on experience at a lab or a job site, this is the kinesthetic type of learning. Also, any kind of simulations, that can be like an online computer simulation or something like that. And also interactive labs. If you have a lab set up in your office, like a demo lab, that'd be a great place for them to learn too on some stuff as well. The last type of learning style we see here is reading and writing. So a lot of people, sometimes they benefit by reading detailed manuals. Like myself, I'm a reader, so I like to read through manuals. I don't mind doing that. Written instructions, they like to have everything written out in a nice formal, step-by-step pattern. Or they like to take notes too as well. They like to have that brain to pencil and paper to make sure that all sticks, okay? So these are the different learning styles that we need to be aware of, and we need to try to incorporate these in our lesson plans if we can, just to be able to adapt to the different learning styles. Okay, so next we're going to go over the different generational learning preferences. And this is based on, age and when they were born, and what environment they grew up in, educationally, societally, all those types of factors come into play here. Now, this is not strictly concrete for every single generation. You might have one generation have a preference for another generation, for example. But let's just kind of go through this real quick so you'll get a good idea. And this is really good when you're first trying to understand your new student. They might not fit in these categories, but this is a good place to start with them, okay? So the first category, we have the baby boomers. Okay, so this is going to be the older crowd. You could see when they were born up here. Their learning style, they prefer more structured. Okay, so everything's going to have a certain time, a certain date. Everything has to be very structured on there for them to get something out of it. They like to have instructor-led sessions, like live sessions, someone face-to-face learning. All right. They also like detailed manuals and things like that they can refer to so they can read through it and make sure everything's precise. All right. So my tip for this type of generation, use step-by-step guides with them. Avoid fast-paced content. Okay. Make sure that you're not going too fast with them. and allow time for questions and ask for questions too, because they might not ask them. So just keep that in mind when you're addressing this generational type. Next, we have the Gen X, which is my generation actually. So this will be like more independent learners who do appreciate flexible, self-paced modules. Okay, so with this type of generation here, so you could provide detailed documentation for them, manual, step-by-step instruction type deals. Video tutorials are great. So if you have any references on YouTube or anything for them to watch, or some, a series that they can watch on tutorials on any kind of BAS, that would be great. And also access to online resources for self-study as well. So they're more getting into the technology. They're more comfortable with it at this point. So you could start introducing that with this generation more. Now, millennials. So millennials are really the first generation that grew up from birth, really, with computers and eventually smartphones too as well. So they prefer interactive type things. Could be digital interactive stuff, games, gamify things. I'm going to show you in a little bit what I do when I gamify things. And then also social learning experiences too as well. So they like to do it with teams and things like that, and games, all that fun stuff. So my tips on this is use e-learning platforms for this generation. It's very successful with them. Make sure we have interactive quizzes for them to get their recall information. And then also if there's any social learning communities or anything like that online, that would be great for them to join. Like if there's anything on Twitter or TikTok or whatever social media platform they like, maybe there's an HVAC community that they can join and they can learn from there in those communities. Okay. So that's going to be the millennials, and then Gen Z, which is going to be our youngest generation right now that's in the field, our 20-year-olds. So this generation was definitely very well versed in technology. So they're very visual. They like visual learning. They like digital first learners, and they prefer bite-sized content. With this generation, we got to be very careful. We got to make sure that we change it up every 5 minutes what they're doing if you're teaching them something, because they'll lose interest really fast. And you can't put too much on their plate at one time. You got to provide it in small chunks so they can digest that material. So my tip on this one, use short videos, video lessons if there is any. Try to keep them within 5 minutes or less if you can. Don't go over 10 minutes is what I'd recommend. So they'll probably tune out at that time. And interactive simulations are great too. If there's an online simulation, that would be good. And anything that's mobile friendly, they love that because they grew up with this. So they are very well used to that. Now, when I'm saying this, this is not concrete for every generation. Some generations might prefer other generation preferences, but just keep this in mind as a starting point, just to get to understand how to best format their training experience. Okay, so that's the different generations here that we need to be aware of. Now let's talk about why training matters in building automation and how we can benefit of it or with it. So building automation, as we all know, is very complex, especially in the modern day that we live in today. So today we integrate HVAC, lighting, security, and also energy management, fire alarm systems, a lot of stuff. We have the Internet of Things now, where we're connecting all the devices, on an IP network. So they got to know a lot about IT. They got to know about AI now too, as well. So with this vast blend of technical and operational knowledge that they're supposed to learn, we got to make sure that we introduce this in the right ways for it to be successful for the technician. Because the last thing we want is we don't want them to get burnt out and just quit, or we don't want them to have any kind of educational gaps as they're going along through the training. Now, let's talk about some benefits of proper training. Okay, number one we see here is optimal system performance of the building automation system. So users can leverage the full capabilities of the system, ensuring things that was supposed to be in there in the first place. Like if the whole goal was energy efficiency and cost savings because of that energy efficiency, we want to make sure that they're trained properly to make sure we have all the those items in the building automation system for it to function correctly. Okay. Also, outside of system performance, we have reduced maintenance calls. This is a big deal for tenant comfort levels at our customer job sites. So well-trained users can troubleshoot minor issues, reducing the dependency on technical support. Okay, so train your customers well at the job site. That way they'll be satisfied with their system and they'll know how to use it, and then they can be successful maintaining their buildings. Next, we see here user confidence and also satisfaction. So proper training will enhance the user's confidence. It leads to higher satisfaction, gives a good relationship with your company too as well, and it ties you in there more like a team with that customer as well. And it also implements better user adoption rates. So, if I've been to these job sites where the maintenance staff, they have a system in there, nobody knows how to use it very well, and so they just give up on it and they just kind of let it go. And it's pretty sad to see that, because it's a waste of money for the user. Maximized return on investment. This is important too, because we want them to get the most value out of their investment. They spend a lot of money on the building automation system, so the more they know about it, the more efficiently it's going to run and the less downtime it's going to have. It's also going to increase the longevity of their mechanical equipment if they have a properly tuned BAS system. And the only way they can properly tune that is if they know about it through training. Okay, so that's a couple of some items there on the benefits of training. All right, so now let's talk about the different types of customer training. We're going to talk about customer training versus internal training at your local office here. So some areas that we need to focus on with customers, like whenever you go out after the job has been installed, we're going to go train the customer. Some of this training items might be listed in the spec, like how they want training, how many hours, what the format looks like, and all that stuff here. If it doesn't, these are some good ideas to put in there as you're going through structuring your training program for them. First one, we need to include basic operations for them. We need to include like adjusting set points, teach them how to do that, teach them how to create schedules, and also teach them how to respond to alarms. We might even throw in there, teach them how to create a trend or a data log, things like that. Okay. Also train them how to use their user interface. Okay. Navigating all the dashboards, the floor plans, how to get everywhere, where everything's located at, accessing critical data for decision making too. Teach them how to make a trend, things like that. Also hands-on training. This is really important for customers too. Now, you want to have some exercises when you go to training with real-world scenarios. When you go out to the job site, what I used to do is I didn't get on the computer and navigate for them and show them. I used to get one of the customers to get on the computer and have them navigate as I instructed them to go through certain steps on the user interface. That way they're familiar with it and they see other people using it and they become more comfortable with it. Okay. So just have some real world scenarios, maybe even set up like a sandbox type scenario where you have a bunch of, user logins to where they can just practice overriding set points and things like that. Also some best practices, emphasize energy efficiency and maintaining system integrity. Just teach them little things. When you teach them these things, that's going to provide a return on investment for energy efficiency, and then maintaining that system integrity is going to increase the tenant comfort level of their customers. So keep that in mind too on the best practices. Some tips for effective customer training is keep the sessions short and focused on essential tasks. Okay, so a lot of times the job might require 8 hours of training or 12 hours of training. That's probably too long for somebody to sit through one training session. Break it up into 4-hour sessions if you can. Okay. That way, those small chunks, they can think about it. And then the next day they come back and they might ask you some questions. Okay. If you could do that, keep it in small chunks. Use intuitive language. Don't use too much technical jargon, because a lot of the stuff they might not understand. Anything that you're talking about, make sure they understand the terms. Okay. If they don't know what a VFD is, you need to explain what a VFD is, for example, or a VRF system. So just make sure we explain that and not use too technical, overly technical language. Also provide digital resources. Okay, this can be like manuals. Okay, make sure they have a user interface manual and one for all their controllers that they can use as a resource. Also include any video tutorials or YouTube videos from your company that you might have as well. If you have any quick reference guides, like some troubleshooting guides, that would be great for them as well to give that to them on a one-page sheet. Also, have some contact information. If they run into any problems, they can contact you and ask you any question they might have. Okay, so now that we talked about the customer training, let's talk about the internal training. And this will be more for your technicians at your local office. Okay, so we want to teach your technicians advanced technical skills, obviously. So we're going to have to include, high level subjects here like network configurations, how to put these controllers on the network, programming logic, how to write programs. If there's any kind of system integrations, we'll have to know how to do that too as well. IT network troubleshooting, if there's a backnet troubleshooting issue, backnet over IP or something like that. So that'll have to be included too as a focus for internal training. Hands-on experience, this is great too. Of course, we've talked about this a little bit already, but interactive labs using hardware and the software would be great as well. Real-world problem solving. So whenever we're teaching our technicians, anything, maybe about a chill water plant like we see over here in troubleshooting scenarios, we can bring up a case study or something like that, or maybe it was another building where we had a high delta T issue in the boilers or the chiller system, or we had chiller isolation valve issues, and we talk about the sequences. So use real world scenarios. That would be always good to tie in that knowledge with a real world application. Okay. Also safety and compliance. Obviously, we want to make sure our technicians are safe. So emphasize safety protocols and compliance requirements that's on the job sites, and also make sure we implement safe cybersecurity practices as well. Now, some tips for effective internal training. So we need to include a mix of theoretical and practical experiences to reinforce the training. So we need to have some theory where they understand kind of like the reading and all that stuff over there. And then we need to go over here to the practical, the hands-on, to put that theory into the real world, okay, to reinforce that learning. Next, we have encourage peer-to-peer learning. Okay, so that's whenever we work in groups, or maybe we could learn by teaching others. And we can always also have knowledge sharing sessions. Maybe one technician teaches another technician how to do something else. I mean, that would be a great way to do it, because remember, whenever they're teaching others, they're getting 90% of learning retainage. Okay. And then also provide ongoing training programs to keep up with system updates. Okay. Because we know our controllers and our software is always ever changing. So make sure that we're keeping up with that, and make sure we have a pathway for your technicians to get some of that training. Okay. So now let's talk about some effective training methods. And we talked about this already, but we talked about the hands-on and interactive labs. This is a great way to learn. This really helps the kinesthetic learners. And when they get the hands-on training, this is going to reinforce their practical application, like real-world applications. They're going to simulate real-world scenarios, such as adjusting an airflow sensor or wiring up an airflow sensor, and maybe a lab kit that we see over here, or configuring a VAV box in the software, in the service tool software. You can also use role playing for troubleshooting exercises. You can set up something in the lab. You can make something break and make them troubleshoot it. Okay, I've seen some teachers do that, and it's very successful. So that's the hands-on training. I like that one. That's really good to use in labs. Next, we have the blended learning approach. So this is going to combine online modules with in-person sessions for flexibility. We do this a lot at Smart Buildings Academy. We have online modules that they have to complete with video lessons that they watch. And then we have them also do a lab to follow up with that video lesson to tie in that kinesthetic learning with hands-on training as well. And also incorporate live Q&A sessions for real-time support. I mean, if you have customers that need that, you can offer that too as well. Okay, next we have gamification and social learning. This is really popular with the millennial and Gen Z generation, and really everybody likes to play games, and it's a fun way to learn. So this increases engagement and also motivation. I will say if you're doing this, it does take time to put these together, so just be aware of that. However, there's a lot of online gamified type quizzes you can get, like Kahoot. There's one called Quizzes that I like to use. Down here, I made a Jeopardy game over here for point extensions, and we had a really good time with that with the students in the class. So anything you can think of, put it together as a game. They like to play games. Create online communities for peer-to-peer learning. This would be like a message board type deal if they like to chat and things like that, and knowledge sharing as well. You might want to set something up in your office or maybe even customers, something like that. All right, so that's gamification and also social learning. Next, we have ongoing support and refresher courses. As we all know in this industry, it's ever changing. We're getting new technologies all the time, and we have to be continuous learners for the rest of our lives, really. So this will ensure that retention, knowledge retention, and keeps users updated on system changes if there is any. You can have them provide access to a knowledge base or refresher courses like we have over here. Podcasts are great. At SBA, we have podcasts pretty much every week. So if you want to learn anything about any topic, just come to our website and have them direct them over here, and they can learn about a lot of different topics on building automation. So everything they learn, I mean, they could be listening to it in their truck on the way to the job site, as far as that goes. Also organize quarterly webinars to address common issues and new features. That kind of ties into the podcast or webinar type deals too. Okay, let's go over some common challenges you might have when you're training your new technicians. The first one we see here is information overload. That's one thing we want to avoid with every generational preference, really. We have a lot of different topics in building automation. We do not want to overload them with too much information. So I would recommend breaking down complex topics into small, manageable modules, small chunks, so they can digest it easy and not get overwhelmed. Okay, use micro-learning techniques. Make sure you define terms that you're talking about. They might not understand, what a DPT is, a differential pressure transducer is. You need to explain what that is. You can't just say that, because they're going to be wondering what that is while you're still talking and trying to continue the lesson. Okay, so make sure you define terms. That's really important, especially in our field when we have so many acronyms. Okay, diverse skill levels. I'll be teaching a class in WFD where we have HVAC mechanics coming in and learning building automation, and I have people that is coming out of high school that doesn't have any experience at all. So you might have diverse skill levels, so you need to have some pre-assessment tests. That would be always good. And then you can kind of custom tailor the content to their skill level. And you might even have to offer, extension exercises to the ones that might already be advanced, okay, to give them an extra challenge. Okay. And we can also offer beginner to advanced courses as well, if you want to do that. Now, some students might have a resistance to change. Okay. But for example, artificial intelligence, a lot of people have resistance to change on that. It might be a new refrigerant or something like that. That's normal. Sometimes that'll happen, but emphasize the benefits of the new change of the system. Maybe it'll increase energy efficiency. Maybe it'll decrease cost savings for the customer, and show success stories, how much easier it's going to be for them to that's going to help them perform their daily job task. Okay. So that's resistance to change. You might see that as well. And also the retention of information. So use spaced repetition. So repetition's really good whenever they're trying to learn something. It's a complicated wiring situation. You might want to have them do that several times until they master it, for example. You might want to have interactive exercises, okay, where they're doing a lab or they're in a group discussion with a group of people. Or it could be a real world scenario to reinforce learning on the job site. So different types of learning situations to help them retain that information will always be helpful. Okay. All right. So that pretty much covers most of my content that I wanted to talk about today. So let's do a quick summary on what we learned. Okay. So remember, we learned the importance of tailored training or custom training for different user groups. Okay. Remember, we have those different generational preferences. So we got to be aware of that. And we might have to tailor our training based on their learning style. Okay. We also talked about adapting methods for different learning styles and generational preferences, like we just talked about tailoring the training. And then you can also use blended learning, gamification, and ongoing support for effective knowledge retention. We talked about that too as well. And then we also addressing common challenges with strategic solutions. We talked about that as well, how we can overcome some of those challenges. And then some practical tips for impactful training. Incorporate feedback loops for continuous improvement. All right. So make sure that you're getting feedback from your student. Ask them, check in on them periodically. Ask them how they're doing. Ask them if they have any questions. Make sure they're not getting down or not going to give up or burnt out. And be patient with them. That's a big thing as being a teacher. You got to have patience. And you can't give up on them. You got to keep their spirits up and keep motivating them to get there. Also use a mix of theoretical and hands-on exercises. Theory is important. We have to know the theory in our industry. That's very important. But you also need to tie that into a hands-on real-world experience for them to really get that connection. Okay. And then last, we have digital tools and interactive learning experiences. This might be like an audio video lesson on YouTube. It could be a simulation on a computer, or it could be doing a lab in the lab station. Okay. All right. Well, that pretty much wraps up our podcast here. Thank you very much for listening to the Smart Buildings Academy podcast. We hope you learned something from this episode. And if you found this episode valuable, please leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcast or Spotify. If you're listening on YouTube, please like, comment, and subscribe. And if you're watching this on LinkedIn, if you could, please share this with your network. We'd really appreciate that. And as always, if you want to watch this video again, you can go to our website. It's going to be podcast.smartbuildingsacademy.com/486. All right. Thank you very much for joining me, and we'll see you next week. Take care.